My name is Betsy Dague, and I'm the director at the Jeanette Rankin Peace Center. And about a year ago, or right before our annual Peace Party, which is coming up again, we were gifted by David Claman with this picture that he did of the pieces of the peace sign as they currently reside. And we auctioned it off raffled it off, I guess, at our Peace Party last year. And in the course of just having a photo around the Peace Center and looking at it and reflecting on it, lots of people had comments to make about, boy, it's a shame that's not here anymore, and whatever happened to that. And so we started looking more at that and putting up some displays in the store about the stuff that Glenn and Amity do and some other peace sign things that we have now in the store. And interest just kept swelling about people that wanted to do something to put a permanent sign of peace back in Missoula. So we have started working on that to see, is that possible and what might that look like. The committee that we have together has really two goals that they're looking at. One is some way to create some kind of permanent peace sign in Missoula, and we don't know yet how that's going to look or what it's going to be or where it's going to be, but to have some permanent sign that people can see and notice. And the second part of our desires is to work on honoring the iconic value of the old peace sign in some way. So those are the things that we're looking at. And this evening grew out of those discussions because many of the people are new to the community and maybe somewhat less familiar than others with exactly what happened and when it happened and how it happened and what is the peace sign, where did it come from anyway. So Jim has graciously agreed to fill us all in on that. He's been involved in this process a long time through many other community discussions, and he's agreed to help us to do that. We do have some literature back there, some surveys for you to fill out and things to sign in. And these little yellow things are our flyers for our annual fundraiser and Peace Party this year, which is September 17th. And this year we're using David's photo as the graphic. And we also have this, again, for raffle, another print of that frame. So I don't have any raffle tickets. That was a missight on my part, but Chairman of our board has some. Or you can stop by the Peace Center and we'll be happy to fill out raffle tickets for you. So with that, I'm turning it over to Jim. Thank you.
Thanks, Betsy.
Well, I first want to make the disclaimer that there are many more people in this room that know a lot more about this and hands-on about this than probably I do. But I've had the good pleasure of being able to go through records. I love it. Everybody checks to see if it's their phone. I already silenced mine. I remembered to. So we're going to kind of have a little fun tonight. We'll try not to make it too long. Feel free afterwards to look at some of the things we've gathered on the tables. It's not a complete selection, and I'll be passing a few things out tonight. My involvement, I moved to Montana in 1989. And it became very clear immediately that this was a cool place because it had this giant peace sign on the hill. And, you know, among other reasons, I thought that was a pretty nice, good place to live. Well, then we had this event back in 2000, or 1991, excuse me, that was some guy that wanted us to go to a far-off country and make trouble in Iraq, and had this disturbance called the First Gulf War. And I was pretty active in that, and one thing leads to another, and before you know it, you find out where all the great people are in your community. And from there on, I learned more about that peace sign, and we'll talk a little bit about it tonight, and then maybe have an open discussion about what you all think about this, where this is going, join the group that's already discussing it. But I thought it'd be interesting, because I found it interesting when we tried to save this piece back in 2000 before they tore it down. We actually committed ourselves to a community discussion. And those surveys are from that 2000 discussion. And when we gathered over 700 written comments from folks that someday, and they're scattered around, feel free to look through them. I mean, there's everything from obscenity to very thoughtful, treatises about why people feel that this is a significant icon, or why they feel it's graffiti or vandalism and such. For those of you that, well, we'll get to this, I'm jumping ahead. So feel free to fill out one of those questionnaires if you want to, and we'll begin anew and get new ideas. But let's talk a little bit about how this peace sign, or this symbol, actually first came to be, because I was always pretty fascinated by this, and it was very different than anything I would have imagined. And it actually happened back on Easter weekend in 1958 across the ocean from us in a small town near London. And a group of folks who were marching against, their committee was called the Direct Action Committee Against Nuclear War. And this is the first Aldermaston march from London to Aldermaston, where I haven't done the research, but I imagine there was some sort of nuclear thing going on there because they kept marching to this place. Well, the night before the march, as the story goes, they needed a symbol. They needed something to be able to march with. And so I'll read you a little bit about this. Have you ever wondered where the peace symbol came from? It seems the peace symbol surfaced on letters from the Direct Action Committee Against Nuclear War in its original form as early as March 1958. Bertrand Russell was a member of this committee, and through his writings has left us with an unmistakable history of when, where, and who created the peace sign. Here are quotes from letters Bertrand Russell wrote in response to H. Pickles from Lickport Verlag, who wrote to complain that the peace symbol was a death symbol because the arms pointed downwards. Russell's reply, quote, "I'm afraid that I cannot follow your argument that the ND badge is a death symbol. It was invented by a member of our movement as the badge of the Direct Action Committee Against Nuclear War for the first Aldermaston March. It was designed from the Naval Code of Semaphore, and the symbol represents the code letters for ND. To the best of my knowledge, the Navy does not employ signalers who work upside down." So there you have it. The Navy Code of Semaphore is the flag signaling system. And how that works is the D in Navy Code is this. And that would be for nuclear. And the D, the N is, no, I'm right. The D is this, and then the N is out like this. And so this gentleman took the N and the D, put them together, decided that he'd enclose it in a ring, and that's how the first peace symbol came to be. And he passed these out, and I'll pass them around to the audience so we can all take a look at them. This was the original usage of the symbol. And they made lollipop signs out of them and carried them from London to Aldermaston in the first march. Now, Gerald Holtom is in fact widely credited with the design of the nuclear disarmament symbol, aka the peace symbol. A little before the first Aldermaston March in Easter 1958, on a purple square was superimposed a white circle with a purple cross inside it, or almost a cross. The arms had slipped and were drooping against the lower sides of the circle. Holtom had made the design by combining the semaphore letters N and D, N for nuclear, D for naturally disarmament. Holtom was a commercial artist with, it seems, a visual aid factory, so the story goes. Greer says he put his factory in Twickenham to making lollipop signs marked with droopy cross. And the symbol was to appear at either end of banners stretching from one side of the street full of marchers to the other. Holtom and other C&D artists pointed out other symbolism in the flag as well. The semaphores together, without the circle, look like a stick figure with its arms outstretched. Quote, "the gesture of a human being in despair." The circle represents the womb, or unborn generations, as well as the world. And the color black represents eternity. One other reference that we found over the course of this was the symbol is also, in fact, the death rune of the Futhark runic alphabet. Now, whether this is an intentional similarity or not, C&D supporters, particularly Christian ones, used to get very uppity when this was pointed out to them. About 10 years later, and this is where we probably all will remember this a little more so, the symbol was adopted as a general peace sign with the student anti-war movement, and it became probably the best known symbol of the youth culture of the 60s. I'll leave that to the next one. So then how did we have this march going on across the ocean in 1958? How the heck did we end up getting it here in the US? Well, interestingly enough, how it crossed the Atlantic. Again, so the story goes. The symbol crossed the Atlantic almost immediately as one Bayard Rustin, these names all seem fairly familiar, but they don't seem to know each other, an associate of Martin Luther King, came over for the Aldermaston March. Soon the symbol began appearing in civil rights marches in the US. And then, as we just spoke of, the next big moment for this symbol, bringing it to worldwide attention, was during the Vietnam War in the 60s and 70s. The demonstrations against the war solidified the symbol as a sign of peace. This sign or symbol has never been copyrighted, truly making it free for all to use. This brings us to our local history and the history of the Missoula peace sign. Let's see if I can find all the little handouts I have for you. I might have lost a couple of them. You'll see on the back table, and you can look at it later, there's actually a schematic. Yeah, just a second. There's a schematic that'll show you where on Waterworks Hill this used to be, and of course it was part of the open space planning use, and when people were drawing maps about the North Hills, they always located the peace sign as a locator because most people knew where the peace sign was, and therefore they knew more about the North Hills, and that's on a map somewhere. Yeah, you had a question?
Yeah, what is the C? The C stand for C and D?
It was D and N, nuclear disarmament, and those were the two flag letters. The D and the N, and the D and the N, right. This was the N, this was the D, so nuclear disarmament. And they were using that because this was a group fighting against nuclear proliferation and the abuse of nuclear power.
Was it the C, campaign for nuclear disarmament?
Campaign for, oh, I'm sorry, in the thing, I'm sorry. I'm going, I didn't think I said C, but I could have. Yeah, the campaign for nuclear disarmament, sorry, thank you. So in 1968, oh yeah, way back.
Note on Bayard Rustin.
Yeah.
He's a gay man who was the organizer of the People's March on Washington, Martin Luther King March on Washington. That's who he is.
Thank you, thank you.
Was,
yeah. And I, until recently, didn't even know, I had never run across the connection of how it got back to America, so it's kind of interesting. So in 1968, US West Microwave Reflector was built and erected on Waterworks Hill in Missoula, Montana. Situated on 0.23 acres of land owned by the company, surrounded by city lands. It's the only place in the world where the phlox missouliensis grows and blooms in the springtime. The sign is 30 feet by 30 feet, or was, or 900 square feet and reaches 4 stories up in the air, roughly 500 feet above the valley floor. It's divided into 9 equal sections, 10 feet by 10 feet. So now I need a couple volunteers, because that's something that's kind of hard to visualize. So can I have somebody right here, please? We'll start over here. Hold this, young man. No, right here, don't go away. Okay. We're all ready and not. All tied up. Okay, and I need somebody to hold this blue piece right here, please. Anybody like this? We might not have enough in this room for this whole exercise. Okay, and somebody right here, please. Yeah, right on this hand right here. Okay, and then I'm going to go over to here. Now, this is one side of the peace sign. And so, where Pete and Betsy are, they're holding sections of the peace sign. So these are 3 sections of the peace sign, of which there are 9. And I don't even think we could stretch it across this way and bring it back to the front of the room. We'd all be covered with the sign. So this just,
You mean there are 9 square?
no, there are
lanes?
9, between Betsy and I is 1 square, 1 side of a square of the peace sign. So I'd have 3 more sides coming towards you, right? My corner.
Equidistant?
Yes.
That you and Betsy
This
are?
is 1 of 4 sides of the entire sign, and within that entire sign there are 9 pieces. So it's a pretty good sized sign, which is why we didn't bring it here tonight.
Jim, one way to demonstrate that would be to take that line and make it into a square, and then you can see what 1 square looks like.
Well, let's do it. Go ahead. Somebody else jump up there. Why not?
Well, since I said okay. All right, you got it. Then you could actually see how big it is.
There are 9 of those.
There are 9 of those.
Okay, thank you.
And those are the pieces of piece that you see in this picture that David took. Okay? It's big. Each piece weighs about 200 pounds because it's covered in metal and on a steel frame. They're not easy to move around. Its primary purpose was to reflect telephone signals around the valley, but all that changed in 1983. There's a long tradition coming out of folks in Missoula, in the valley, for standing up for peace and conducting our lives to support the values of peace, not war. Perhaps the most famous, back in 1917, a vote was cast by a Montana congressperson against entering into World War I. In fact, it was the only no vote. And she said at the time, quote, "I want to stand by my country, but I cannot vote for war. I vote no," unquote. This voice, born on a Grant Creek ranch just around the corner, none other than Jeanette Rankin. So 1978, in this year, an addition was added to one of Missoula's zoning laws, declaring Missoula a nuclear-free zone, except for medical purposes. And in fact, Missoula was the first declared nuclear-free zone in the United States. It held no power against the federal government's wishes, however. In 1980, in a statewide ballot initiative here in Montana, Montanans passed banning the disposal of nuclear waste in Montana, 1980. 1981, trains were traveling through Missoula, and their cargo sometimes contained nuclear warheads heading for a military base on the Pacific coast and then into submarines, ever fearful of the enemy. During this time, the Missoula City Council passed an ordinance banning the transport of nuclear materials through the city limits, except medical wastes. This was overturned in the courts, citing that a city government could not impede interstate travel. Yet, Missoulians were making their wishes known. 1981. November of 1982, Montana voters passed a citizen initiative to stop production of nuclear warheads, a nuclear freeze, unheard of. Missoula's former mayor, Mike Cadis, was very actively involved in that campaign. How things change. These were concerns our citizens held dear some 24 years ago. Yet back in the early 80s, some folks on the north side of town were spurred on by some downtown agitators who called themselves the Pine Street Liberation Front and loosely formed the NSLF, or the North Side Liberation Front, an underground network of peace supporters. Back in the late 70s and early 80s, some folks living on Pine Street downtown, and I'm getting this information from a lot of different sources. I won't credit each source. Many of them wish that it was more of a community dialogue. They don't need to be singled out. I can't verify that this is true, but the people that I got these from, I know them to be true, so we can hope. Back in the late 70s and early 80s, some folks living on Pine Street downtown jokingly called themselves the Pine Street Liberation Front. Their main public act was to shoot fireworks at the Sheriff's Department jail at the top of the county courthouse every 4th of July night. They quit when someone got caught. At the same time, the Down Home Project, now Garden City Seeds and Mud, had been started on Phillip Street, and others in a broad circle of friends and activists had moved to Missoula's Northside neighborhood. We would joke about this, a quote, we would joke about seceding from Missoula and hanging a "Welcome to the Independent North Side" banner from the Orange Street underpass, and called ourselves the North Side Liberation Front, NSLF. I'll hand out one of the early communiques from this dastardly group that was forming to subvert the normal cultures of our communities. We never had a meeting or manifesto, and anyone that wanted to could and did call themselves NSLF. When we painted the sign, it was only natural to sign it NSLF. As they whimsically spoke about seceding from Missoula while enjoying backyard barbecues and good draft beer, some of the group's members took note of a blank slate looming 500 feet above them on Waterworks Hill. Before we recall the history of the reason why the first peace sign appeared, let's revisit my favorite rumor. The Grateful Dead played at the Aber-Day Kegger sometime before I moved to Missoula in 1975, says this quote. I've heard and believe that Jerry Garcia got beamed with a plastic pitcher during the show. I've also heard, and don't believe, that he said they wouldn't return to Missoula until, quote, there is peace on the mountain, unquote. Missoula lore has it that that is why we painted the sign. Sometime along the way, vandalism became myth. That's my favorite. And there are many of why this happened, and supposedly not all of them are true. May 1983, I guess the urge was getting too much to leave that alone for too long, and the first original schematic, these folks weren't fully around, appeared. This was not to be a task taken lightly. No, there was work to be done, and it needed to be done well. The first appearance of the Missoula peace sign would soon be dawning into public view. But what color to paint this sign? A sign that one NSFL member called an expression of our values rather than a comment on an issue. Would it be red for revolution? Black for anarchy? No, said one who is known for his artistic abilities and sensibilities. It's up on Waterworks Hill. It's a beautiful place. It should be green. And there was no further discussion. The first painting was done by 6 folks, 4 men and 2 women. 5 were in their 20s and 1 was 19. None were mountain or metal sign climbers. They were described as the following. The woman, UM student, Central American Solidarity activist. Man, artist, organic gardener. Woman, sustainable living activist. Man, tree planter. Man, student, peace activist. Man, peace activist, worked odd jobs. Doesn't sound too much different than a group of us coming together now. Since then, the crews have included more teenagers, 50-year-olds, a wide range of citizens, natives and decades-long residents, union organizers, a writer, a journalist, at least one former Missoula City Council member, VOTEC, now UM-COT students, community, peace, environmental activists, state workers, rainbow family folks, nurses, farmers, musicians, and more. A lot of folks had a chance over the years. Someone bought the paint, others handled the ropes and such, and this motley crew headed out between 11 p.m. and midnight for a task of unknown proportions. As the story goes, the bottom third of the sign was painted from the ground with extended rollers. The top was another story altogether. Remember stretching this out, putting it up in the air, and then raising that 10 feet above the ground. Okay? For this, the crew needed to climb aloft the 4-story structure and tie in one of the lightest members, then send them over the top of the sign to complete the painting of the symbol by lowering and raising this person, swinging them back and forth. I understand there was some discomfort, and perhaps some of the members had to change during the course of the evening for the difficulty and discomfort of probably being wrapped in a rope and being swung madly around a sign in the middle of the night. I can just guessing that might have been a little uncomfortable. Finally, the job was completed some 6 hours after they began. Once this procedure was perfected over time, however, it was said 2 painters could handle the job in a very quick time. So as this group retreated from the hilltop and arrived once again on the valley floor, dawn brought forth the birthing of a cultural icon to some, graffiti and vandalism to others, and the Missoula peace sign was viewed for the first time by the public below in the valley. This painting lasted 2 years before a red symbol replaced it for another 2 years. August 28th, 1983. August 28th. I think it's very surprising myself that it took this long, but on this day, the first letter to the editor was written regarding the appearance of the peace sign on the hill. And it was written by a couple from Dover, Florida. I'll read the entire letter. It's quite something. Friesniks Attacked is the title. While passing through the beautiful state of Montana on our way to Washington State, my husband and I stayed in your lovely town of Missoula. We enjoyed walking through the town, meeting some of the townspeople, and browsing through some of the stores. There was only one thing that marred our visit to such a nice town. On one of the hills overlooking the town, someone or some group had placed a Friesnik or anti-nuclear sign. Don't these people realize that the peace movements of the 30s brought on World War II simply because peaceful nations had laid down their arms and trusted that there would never be another war? The Russians over the last several years have broken over 100 treaties, including the SALT treaties. The attitude, better red than dead, tends to make me a little sick. If the Friesniks need something to occupy their time, let them work for General Dan Graham's High Frontier. This is non-nuclear. It will put satellites in outer space that will shoot down any missiles fired at our nation and will benefit not only the protection of our nation, but will benefit the free enterprise system as well. We must not wait for the something to conquer space, the Russians, to conquer space, but be ahead. We can only have peace through strength, prayer, and bringing all people back to God. Well, we've had several other letters to the editor over the years. Some of them are assembled back there. Feel free to read through them. But that seems a very poignant reminder that peace through strength, and let's build that Star Wars capacity that Reagan so wanted. Late fall 1987, jumping a little. The third painting occurred late in the year. The goal was to wait as long as possible to paint the sign in hopes that the approaching winter would prevent US West from painting over the peace sign, and it would last on the hill all winter. Because as we'll find, as soon as one sign went up, then the US West folks had to cringe and shake their heads and go and try to cover it up for their waves to be able to bounce off the reflector and not be distracted. We'll talk more about that later. Well, half of the goal was realized by these faithful crew members. A group of 6 or 7 stalwarts headed for the reflector panel in the middle of the night. Although cold, everything began well, and soon the crew had the left-hand side of the symbol painted, and then things changed. The wind picked up fast. Soon it was downright wild on the hillside, and the crew was having trouble maintaining their purpose. A winter-like hailstorm crashed down on the party, sending the erstwhile painters scrambling down the hillside for safety. They never did make it back that night, or any night thereafter, as winter set in firmly. So the winter of 1987-88 was the winter of half peace. The left side complete, the right side missing. It wasn't until March of the following year that the symbol finally was completed during a warm flush of early spring. May 1989 to June 1992. During this 3-year period, many additional signs and symbols and words made appearances on the peace sign or reflector panels. Some lasted longer than others, and I'm wondering if we have the ability to name all of them. What else appeared besides this symbol?
Bird.
The what?
Dove.
Dove? What else?
No, it wasn't. Somebody did the
Middle finger?
Bird.
There's a racial epitaph on it at one point.
There was, not during this particular time, but we'll get to that.
Question mark.
Question mark, right?
Oh, yeah.
What else?
Swastika. Right?
Swastika. I don't even remember how to do that, so I'll say swaz. And one winter it was just tan. The question mark actually in little writing had nothing happens at the bottom of it. There was also a fist at one point. And I think what everybody's forgetting, there was a smiley face up there too. Good job though, you guys. It seemed like somebody had some first-hand knowledge about this. So sometime around, I'll show you the smiley face if you have that. This is since we don't have overheads, we'll play with this a little bit and hand out these little things to pass around. This may spur some of your memories a little more. So sometime around 1989, US West erected a 6-foot fence with barbed wire along the top, around the whole reflector panel, and they hung a sign reading, "No trespassing." They said they were concerned with the hindrance of phone calls, yet no evidence was ever presented that indeed phone calls were hindered in the least when a painting adorned the reflector face. This is an interesting little comment. I found it amusing. At one point, this is from this long interview, at one point during the 1980s, US West constructed a 6-foot chain link fence around the peace sign and hung no trespassing signs on the fence. You have to admire the optimism of the corporate honcho who imagines that a 6-foot fence will deter folks that have been scaling a 35-foot structure. April 6, 1990. On this date, the Missoulian used its editorial page to first speak to the issue of Missoulians versus US West. It would not be the last time that they chimed in. The Missoulian editorial, April 6, 1990, "Give peace a chance. US West may as well accept community quirk and let it be. How it is that an illicit peace sign could become a lasting landmark in a community as contentious as Missoula, we simply don't know. It's just one of those idiosyncrasies that make Missoula, Missoula." And I keep thinking, is this the Missoulian writing this? But they will change. They will change later on, folks. Unfortunately, it's also something that makes the telephone company mad. A peace sign is an odd thing for people to get worked up over, but then getting worked up over odd things is another Missoula convention. The peace sign is emblazoned across the face of a large microwave reflector panel on a hillside overlooking the northern end of town. Simply stated, it's the product of graffiti artists, which is perhaps a polite euphemism for vandals, albeit peace-minded vandals. The peace sign, periodically repainted, has been a fixture overlooking the city for years, much to the chagrin of US West and the company that owns the reflector. US West admires the artwork about as much as you might admire a peace sign painted on your property. What's more, the company worries that the peace sign could, it hasn't yet, interfere with the ability of the specially painted reflector surface to bounce telecommunication signals to wherever it is the reflector is supposed to send them. Despite the fact that it's a violation of state and federal law to tamper with telecommunications equipment, nothing U.S. West has done has succeeded in eliminating the peace sign. It has spent lots of telephone ratepayers' money in its losing battle against the symbol of peace, however. Repainting the panel's surface simply provides graffiti artists with a fresh canvas on which to work. Witness the freshly painted peace sign that appeared on the panel last week. Neither chain link fence nor barbed wire have been any more effective than the no trespassing signs at keeping the reflector unadorned. Other than posting armed guards, which seems no way to respond to peace sign painting, perhaps the only other thing for U.S. West to do is be a good sport. And while exercising ultimate control over the color and type of paint who applies it, give its blessing to what Missoula appears determined to have, a peace sign on the hill. How things change over time. After trying, so during this time, early 1990s now, 1989 to 1996 in fact, Missoula's mayor was Dan Kemmis. When representatives of U.S. West came to the city council and pleaded for help with keeping the sign peace-free, the story goes, and I'll paraphrase a little bit here, I'm sure, with respect to Mayor Kemmis, but he very respectfully, in front of the council, advised the corporation that there was really nothing anyone could do. It's Missoula, he told them. And to follow, he suggested that they might just try to, at the very least, leave a supply of the best type of paint available for the inevitable repainting. But you know how these corporate folks are. They can't just take no for an answer, so skillfully they sent their own folks up during the broad daylight to cover up the peace sign once again. But after trying for so many years to overcome the spirit of Missoulians, finally U.S. West just gave in. So in winter of 1995, and this is, I think, speaking to one of you all's suggestion, it was the winter of 1995, for a very brief period in January of 1995, the word nigger appeared in small letters on the reflector. And less than 1 month later, the original crew of painters repainted the peace sign and covered the racial slur. Summer 2000. Moving right along. It was a summer for fires, and the peace sign was not safe. Many of you may remember, as I do, the early evening that hot summer, when if you looked to the North Hills at the right time, you'd see a grass fire, ignited by some passing motorist's cigarette, churning its way up the hill towards the reflector. I remember this because I was on the roof of my shed when I was living on the north side, and I looked up and up it was going. And that, it was churning its way up towards the reflector and threatening to move into the Rattlesnake Valley over the top and many homes beyond. Quickly, slurry bombers were sent out, and I remember watching them drop their load onto the sign as well as the fire line below, which they did put out. The fire was squelched, the burn closely approaching the sign's position. But this event marked the last painting of the peace sign as it carried the remnants, the red remnants, of the bomber's load until the sign finally came down the following spring. And if you look at this picture, it shows, at least in some way, some of the red. And if you ever get a chance to look at these pieces up close, you can see the streaks running down the sign from that red slurry in the summer of 2000. This, by the way, was a billboard that a few of us commissioned and put together around the Gulf War times to just remind Missoulians of a different way of thinking about what was going on. It'd be nice to get it back up someday. Seems like we need it too regularly. November 7th, 2000. On this day, a headline appeared across the pages of the Missoulian, and somewhere out here reading, "Icon in peril, question mark." Finally, the company that bought out US West, Quest, our friends, had moved beyond the old technology for phone transmissions, and the reflector tower had become obsolete. This is when
Champ staff, you have a call at the reference desk, Champ staff, phone
Champ.
call at the reference desk.
This is when the Missoula Community Peace Project began its efforts to save the sign from demolition, Quest's preferred choice. The future of the peace sign is uncertain, says the group. It is painted on a microwave reflector owned by Quest, formerly US West, but as of last summer, it is no longer used by the company. The 0.23-acre piece of property in which it sits is also owned by Quest and is surrounded by city-owned land zoned as open space. Quest is interested in exchanging the 0.3 acres with a piece of property that better supports communications in the Rattlesnake Valley. The Missoula Community Peace Project is a working group of over 30 Missoulians interested in acquiring the 0.23 acres of land as public open space. This broad coalition of people includes members of Missoula Ministerial Association, the city's Open Space Advisory Committee, veterans organizations, the Jeanette Rankin Peace Center, the Northside Westside Neighborhood Council, the Missoula City Council, Missoula Women for Peace, students from Hellgate High School and the University of Montana, as well as peace and justice activists, North Hills hikers, and other interested individuals. This group believes that if an appropriate piece of land could be traded, such an exchange would increase the protection and public access to Missoula's North Hills. In addition to acquiring the land as city-owned open space, the Missoula Community Peace Project would also like to encourage community discussion about the meaning of peace in our town. Because the future of the peace sign on Waterworks Hill is uncertain, the group has begun the process of inviting public comments, collecting pictures, and memories citizens may wish to share about their association with peace and the sign on the hill. They want the community to understand the history of the peace sign and to celebrate its existence over the past 17 years in Missoula. So this group, I was a member of, along with many others here and beyond, did just that, and we put books like this around town where people come in and just write comments, and you get the whole gambit, and there's some books out here, please look at them afterwards. We have these peace sign surveys passed around all over town, and like I said earlier, we had over 700 written comments, not to mention emails and other things coming in. It was truly amazing. We had pictures sent, people's memories of when they first came to Missoula, and that was one of the reasons they stayed. There were veterans and others who felt it was an abomination, an insult, graffiti, vandalism. It has to be taken down. It's a demon sign. It's anti-God. It was amazing the different things that this peace sign elicited from folks in our community.
The footprint of the American chicken was an expression
The footprint
I
of,
hadn't heard in years.
yes, the American chicken. And we all know what that means, don't we? So for the next several months, this group explored ways to preserve peace in Missoula and hopefully save the sign from demolition. As the group reached out in the community and invited citizens to reflect on what the sign meant to them, over 700 written comments were received. I worked with Rob Cheney at the time, who was covering the city beat at that point for the Missoulian, and he set up 4 computer kiosks around town with the Peace Project survey ready to answer. The locations were the Missoula Public Library, the Missoula Veterans Center, City Hall, and Rockin' Rudy's. 60% of these respondents, and we compiled them all and added it all up, 60% of the respondents said, keep the sign on the hill. Here are a few of the comments we got from the kiosks around town. It's a good example of Missoula's history. If we tear it down, what will be left? The buildings are being replaced. Our wilderness is being exploited for logging and houses. What will be left if this example is torn down? Another one. Does not belong to the public. It is only a symbol of Missoula's official culture of adolescent stupidity and selfishness. Screw the damn thing. It is unnatural, said another. Clutters up our cherished, expensive open space, should be removed. Another. It is an upside-down broken cross and is an affront to my Christian faith. It is also a negative symbol for many veterans of the military. Another. It's just like the memorials in Rose Park. Not everyone agrees, but we tolerate each other's views. Please keep this important symbol of peace. And another. There's something about Missoula, something different that brings people here. This is a peaceful place, and people understand that when they come here. The peace sign is a mark of distinction, and it should remain in place. It's very important that visitors see who we are, and the peace sign does this. The Missoulian carried 2 full pages, full spread, of many of the comments that came out of the kiosks. Those are just a few of them. The city council and mayor spoke to the issue on Monday night at their meeting, and their views were as varied as those across town. Mayor Kadis suggested that this issue could spark, quote, a community bloodletting, unquote. While Councilman Jerry Ballas said, quote, it's an insult to those who served in the military, unquote. And Councilwoman Lois Herbig suggested, quote, it speaks to a higher principle of peace in general, unquote. Well, Quest had planned to take down the sign before the end of the year of 2000. The deadlines came and went as Missoula was involved in a heated community discussion. We talked with each other. We listened to each other. Many emotions were shared and expressed, mostly politely. Quest was unwilling, funny enough, to work with the Missoula Community Peace Project to transfer ownership of the land and resolve the liability issue the sign held while it remained atop the hill. There was a wonderful little email I got from one of the guys that we were working with, Russ Cravens. He was the first guy that they assigned to this project, who first came in saying, we're here for the community. We'll work with you. Well, he finally left it and somebody else came on. But originally they said, we're going to have it down by the end of the year for liability issues, get it off the books, blah, blah, blah. So on December 31st, I had sent him an email kind of saying, Russ, it's the end of the year. I've got reporters that want comments. And I thought this was interesting. He actually emailed me back on Sunday, December 31st, 2000. And this is what he wrote. Jim, personally, I'm disappointed that this has grown bigger than Montana. But of course, please get the reporter in touch with me. I have a new job and phone number, but I'll continue the reflector issue. Russ. I think they were getting tired. No leadership emerged from City Hall either to speak to the 60% favorable replies from its citizens. With some exceptions on the council, notably Jim McGrath, who was serving from Ward 2, who really tried to find an avenue to give the mayor an opportunity to really work with citizens and find a solution. They wanted none of it. And so the winter passed. And finally, a final public walk to the Missoula Peace Sign was organized for Wednesday, March 21st, 2001, first day of spring. It was labeled a Peace Odyssey. And this was that invitation at the time that we sent out to folks in the community. Simple, nice walk. As I recall, it was a nice day for a walk. And then soon thereafter, the sign came down in pieces. The one thing that Quest did allow is that they would take it down carefully. They would bring the pieces to a holding place down in the valley, and as long as we sent someone, and thanks to Bob and many others, to come and pick them up, they would allow that to happen. And of course, the sign in the Missoulian was rest in peace. And it's kind of interesting and almost, I don't know what the word is, it's troubling to see this sign broken apart like this. The pieces still remain, as we can see in this wonderful montage here, safeguarded by peace stewards around town. They adorn backyards, storefronts, and pastures. They serve as reminders of a time that was, and perhaps wait for a time to come again, when the pieces of peace may be united again. I'd like to leave you with one final letter to the editor, because this story doesn't end, as we can see tonight. But I'd like to leave you with one final letter to the editor from one Missoulian. It speaks to many of the conversations we heard throughout the community conversation. It's titled, "Not All Veterans Hold the Same Views." Don't assume you know a veteran's viewpoint from images presented by the media. Veterans are as diverse as anyone. If you want to know what I think, ask me. If you want to know what another vet thinks, ask him. We are your neighbors, you know. There have been enough assumptions. Tear down this structure with the peace sign if it no longer serves a purpose. Tear it down if it offends, though I doubt if this will bring a resolve to the offended. Just don't use me as an excuse. As for feelings about symbols, there are times when I look up at our American flag and remember how it was misused by my government to convince so many to fight and die in Southeast Asia. Sadness for how our government then abandoned its allies and how my countrymen rejected our returning warriors. Nevertheless, when the colors are presented, I stand in salute. I do this out of respect because I believe in the concept of freedom that this symbol represents to me. I have recently chosen Missoula as my new home, and as for the peace sign on the hill, every time I look up and see this 1960s symbol of peace, a smile comes to my heart. I remember a time in my life when I was young, full of energy, and naive enough to believe that all things were possible, even peace. Then, for just a moment, a long-forgotten feeling comes over me. My body relaxes. It is the late 60s once again. And I've come home to my new hometown of Missoula, where diversity and acceptance are the norm. There even seems to be room for me. Over the course of time, and you'll still see them, our kids notice this as more than just something up on the hill, but as part of what they grow up with. We've been able to collect all sorts of varieties of memories from folks, and I hope sometime we'll be able to have the time and energy to put them all into a book and let Jeanette Rankin Peace Center use that as a tool to raise funds for continuing the march towards peace. And as the gentleman said, I really believe it can happen. And I think part of the reason we're talking tonight and the reason these pieces weren't destroyed is because there is a spirit in this community, a belief in this community, an honest desire by this community to see if we can learn how to achieve peace within us, around us, together, and share that time together. So I thank you for coming. It was kind of an interesting journey backwards and forwards, if you will. Feel free to circulate through the photos, the pictures. They're not going to go anywhere. We'll keep them. Get in touch, leave your name up here, and Betsy and others that are involved in the ongoing discussions of what the next layers of peace may show for our community. You know, sign up. They'll give you a call, come when you can, have a beer when you can't. Think about these memories for you. And I'm sure that in one way or another, we will continue to have peace on the hills around our community. So thanks for coming for tonight. Mr. Parker? Mr. Talbot?
Do we know where all the pieces are?
Yes.
They're all accounted for
Yes.
and...
Yep. And in fact, if all goes well later this fall, Jeanette Rankin and this group will be sponsoring a visiting of the Piece of the Pieces. where we will do a, for a small fee that will be generated back for peaceful activities, people can go from one location to another, have a toast here, a little taste there, a story somewhere else, and you will be able to see and be part of each of those pieces. There are others that have offered property around town, some a little higher on hillsides, some a little lower, and they say, bring it on.
Wow.
Put it up. There are folks that own buildings in Missoula that have said, it's flat on the top of my building. Put it there. So I think there are opportunities for Missoula to consider ways to keep this cultural icon for some, as I said, and graffiti for others, in our imaginations and perhaps even more palpable in actually our vision at some point. So again, I urge you to get involved and see where that trail may lead us. Any other thoughts or questions? Yeah.
I'm wondering about, I assume that you own the rights to the And Justice for All. So
I suspect,
something.
such that,
Anyway,
we didn't make
I'm
up
wondering
those
about
language, though. We didn't make up the language, we just, no. But yeah, we have it available to you again.
Well, I'm just wondering if that wouldn't be a good possibility to try to make that a project to work on, to get a billboard again, that same one.
Yeah.
I would love to see.
And the only problem with these things, Ethel, as you well know, is they're just not cheap to do. I mean,
Right.
1 month of having that billboard up was about $875.
And that's-
About $1,000 a month.
And that was,
That was
5
back
years
in,
ago.
yeah, right.
Was it about $1,000 with graffiti?
No, and it was within range that it could have been.
Where was it?
It was actually outside of the old Good Food store.
yeah.
That was the billboard that was available at the time. And, I think we pulled together enough change for 1 month or so. But it's waiting.
But I suppose billboard space, if you talk to the right people, could be donated. They have blank.
Well, if you know the right people, you could.
Well, but I'm just
Unfortunately,
thinking
most of the
that,
billboards in Missoula are owned by a fairly large corporation. And I'm not sure that this would be their donation of choice, but I'm always hopeful, right? I'm always hopeful. Now, if you asked them rather than me, I bet we'd get a lot further, so.
Thank you, Jim.
So Jim, I find it interesting that the peace sign came to be in 1958, 25 years later. 1983 is when it first appeared on the Hill, and 2008, 50th anniversary of the peace sign is coming up. Just some numbers that are kind of, landmark numbers. Really.
There's a fellow for the crew, right? Yeah. No, really, I mean,
that's
interesting, right?
enough time to kind of pull it all together, and it's.
And for some reason, I suspect we may not have peace worldwide by then.
Yeah.
So it certainly seems that could be a landmark of note. I hadn't thought about that. Interesting. Happens to be the year some of us old guys were born in too, 1958, so.
That's pretty young.
Can still find a room that can say that, I love it. Well, thanks a lot.